My name is Dan, and I'm here at the local harvest market where we have a substantial size market garden of about 25 acres right now. Intensive, no-till production system. We started in 2013, so I believe that makes us in our 8th or 9th growing season. And we grow a wide range of vegetables and lots of the different types of fruits, and we really want to get into a lot more perennials as well here on the farm. So I came out of the education system. I was teaching secondary school, and my dad owned this property here, and he was planning to sell. And the offer came up, you know, Dan, do you want to farm on this land? And so I had the financial backing to make it happen. And you're going to see here, there's a lot more financing behind this project than what you might see at a typical market garden, and I'm very mindful of that, and I want to be considerate of that as we talk about food production. So we got into this 8-9 years ago, and our initial ambition here was to set up a market on the farm and to go in the agritourism direction. The intention was always to have a market here, but we realized that, you know, from what we were told anyway, that it would be impossible to stock the market with vegetables and fruits that were available locally, and we would supplement with product from out of this country, California, Mexico, and the like. And then we realized once we were starting to produce food here that it was actually quite possible to do this. Now, not without challenges, for sure, but there was a wide range of vegetables and fruits that we could provide year-round. So initially when we started farming here, our direction was much towards the high technology end of things, the heavy chemical inputs, lots of soil testing for the chemical aspect of the soil, the mineral content in the soil. So we would hire an agronomist to do some of the work for us. And then when we started farming, I hired a person who had been involved in no-till market gardening, and he had done a 1-acre plot, and by the time we hired him we were already in the month of June, and I thought, you know, it's too late in the year to really get any kind of production for the year. But he came on and taught me a lot of things about market gardening. He had been following Elliot Coleman and John Martin Fauché, and I soon discovered the amount of production that we could get off a really small piece of land. And so we headed in the no-till direction, and we discovered very soon on that we were able to provide the market with a lot of vegetables right through the growing season, and then into the winter, February, March, April probably being the most challenging months at that time. So we discovered then that no-till was beneficial for a number of reasons, and that the biggest thing that got us into no-till initially was the fact that it meant less weeding. Okay, so our labor costs were significantly reduced. We were losing money hand over fist. The investment we had to make into reducing weed pressure with plastic mulches, cultivation systems, etc., etc. And when we moved to no-till, we almost eliminated, well, we eliminated at least 75% of our labor force that was normally directed into weeding, could now be devoted into planting, seeding, bed prep, crop management, things like that. So there was a huge savings for us. Then, and I think that's why most people get into no-till initially. But as we moved along, we soon discovered that no-till had other benefits. We had a lot higher moisture conservation in the soil, so we were doing a lot less irrigation. It was much easier to go from one crop into the next crop, so the transitioning, flipping of beds was really simple. The other huge advantage was obviously in the yield aspect. So our crops were getting better. Of course, we were adding a lot of organic matter into the soil, and I know that would contribute to this as well. But I really do believe that crop yield is enhanced with no-till systems, and also microbial life in the soil was starting to really flourish, and we were starting to see a lot more insect activity on the surface of the soil with the larger pieces of mulch, because we use a pretty coarse mulching system here, as you'll see in just a bit. And the other huge advantage was almost no compaction. So we can drive a tractor over most of our fields, provided it's not too wet outside, and there's very, very, very little compaction as well. And so for those reasons, no-till for us was the answer, and we continue to practice no-till here today to a large extent. So we're here in this new plot of land. It's about 6-7 acres big, where we're transitioning from an originally very, very weedy area that was formerly pasture, and we're trying to move this into a no-till system. And so before you sell that rototiller or the power harrow, I recommend you put it to good use as you make that transition, because it can be really, really helpful. So what I've been doing in this area here, to my left, is I've been power harrowing this almost weekly for the last probably 2 months. I mean, I'm not doing it when it's rainy, but I'm doing it when it's when the conditions are dry. So today I'll probably bring the power harrow out here, and I'll bomb over this area here. And what I'm really trying to do is kill perennial weeds and grass. They're the biggest challenges that we have in the no-till system. When I am confident that it's weed free, and only at that point, and I've exhausted a lot of the weed seed bank, I will layer on top with about 2 to 3 inches of compost. Or, you know, I think we should differentiate between compost and mulch. When I talk about mulch, I'm talking about a coarser, uncomposted material like straight wood chips, or maybe horse manure from the neighbors, or cow manure, mushroom compost and the like. And I'm not picky as to what I'm covering this with. My ambition here is single-purposed, and that's to try to cover the weeds. Okay, cover the ground with a decaying plant material, which on the farm here has become law for us. My first crop that I usually plant into a no-till system is potatoes. And I like potatoes because they're very forgiving, and it's a big seed, and you really can't go wrong. I'm not that concerned whether or not the potatoes are going to turn out. I like potatoes. I learned this from my grandfather. In any new area, put potatoes in, because they really condition the soil well, and you're going to get a yield for sure. So what we'll do is, in this area, we'll carve our furrow before we apply the mulch, and we've eliminated the weeds. We'll carve a furrow in here. We use a BCS, carve a simple furrow. We drop our potatoes in there. We space them as our regular bed system is. We work in it with a 5-foot bed, center to center, from your tractor tires. Center of the one tractor tire to the center of the tractor tire is exactly 5 feet. And we'll carve a furrow right down the middle of that, and we'll cover it up with a native virgin soil, and then on top of that we'll layer our compost. And if I have lots available, I apply lots. I would apply even up to 6 inches if I had the wherewithal to do that. But if you're dealing with acres, the size of acres, that's an almost impossible feat unless you have a large manure spreader. 2 to 3 inches is sufficient, provided it's well covered. At this stage, forever after in this no-till system, we are going to make sure that no weed ever lives even for more than a few days on this plot. Sometimes perennial weeds poke through. That's when we move the mulch aside, we dig it out with a shovel, and we eliminate that weed. We close up with the mulch. And don't forget, we're doing this on the scale of 25 acres. So if you have a half-acre market garden or a quarter-acre market garden, totally achievable, even with a wheelbarrow. And we were doing this with some very rudimentary equipment initially, so it's quite doable. And I would say that don't take on too much, do less and do it well. Keep your original farming system happening, but I would recommend everybody to move towards no-till, even if it means you just did 2 to 3 beds. That's all you can handle for now. You have a hard time sourcing mulch. Do less, but do it really, really well, and then grow from there. And that was probably our biggest downfall here. Not downfall, I mean, we're still standing, but perhaps one of our biggest challenges was going too big too quick. We tried to do this on the scale of 20 acres, and it was an impossibility to keep that up. And then the weeds came through, and all we did at that point was we were fertilizing the very weeds that we were trying to kill. Okay, so now I know what's popping up in your mind is when you harvest these potatoes, you're going to be pulling them up, and you're going to be pulling up that original soil from down below, and that means you're going to be introducing weeds to the surface. What we do is we flatten these beds with a flail mower after the potatoes are harvested, and then we apply another 1 to 2 inches of compost. And after that, we can go in directly with a crop like carrots, or maybe, you know, we're in the fall, we can do our garlic in there. And then garlic is also a really great crop because we can apply mulch on top of the garlic after planting. And anytime you can do 2 things with one motion, for example, cover your garlic, you just lay them on the surface basically, and then you cover it, so you're planting the garlic and you're covering with mulch right away, you're much farther ahead. I'm going to demonstrate some of this, what we're doing. I'm going to show you the power harrow. And I prefer the power harrow much above the rototiller. The power harrow is turning in a circular fashion this way, and I can set the depth on the power harrow to 1 inch, which is approximately what I have it here. So I'm just scuffing up the surface. I don't need to do a deep tillage, and even persistent perennial weeds will eventually exhaust themselves. Even morning glory and blackberries, and we've had Canadian thistle, we've had the works on the farm. Horsetail is another one. Takes a lot longer to eliminate, but your persistence will pay off at the end. And if you have not eliminated the weeds, then do not plant potatoes. Do not plant a crop in there, okay? Just be patient. I'm going to show you the power harrow, and I could show you we can talk about the carving, the furrowing for the potatoes, and covering up with a spreader. I probably won't be getting all that equipment out to show you that, but at least you'll get the general idea. So the real objective here is to try to get these weeds flipped up on their back, so they're going to dry out in the baking sun, which is hard to come by this time of year, but these are the guys I'm trying to eliminate. Traditionally, most farmers would plant now into this material here, and afterwards it's all weed control. As you know, even if you were to seed carrots, it might be too coarse for carrots, but you would seed carrots into this material, and your weeds will be up before your carrots are even out the ground. And some people are using flame weeders, and if we're talking about reducing our carbon footprint, I'm quite against the idea of flame weeders. I'm quite against the idea of plastic mulch. I'm against the idea of diesel fuel, okay? And I don't see a way around it other than a lot of hard work with a spade trying to dig out these weeds. But our objective here on the farm is to try to eliminate tractors, do without them, do without the equipment, and keep our farm as independent as possible from outside influences that can either upset your business plan financially or in terms of availability when times get tough. You know, plastic mulch might not be available, or the repairs on the machine might not be possible, right? So we're up against lots of different forces that are contending to make things challenging for us as farmers. So if we can eliminate these outside pressures, then good. So at this stage, if this was entirely weed free, I would carve a furrow in here and I would drop my potatoes in. And then I would cover up the potatoes with the native soil, get it as flat as possible, and then I'm going to layer on 2 to 3 inches of compost. And I'm going to show you what that looks like over here. So this area has been mulched at this point in time with all kinds of different materials. So this is leaf litter. So we bring in a lot of wood chips from wood chipping companies. You can see some of the coarser material. This is mushroom compost, and I can also see some horse manure in here as well. The concern with horse manures and animal manures is animals don't do a great job of breaking down the weed seeds, and so that can be a challenge as well. Make sure they're composted for some time. You might be asking, well, you shouldn't be applying fresh manures directly to to a crop. Well, these manures were deposited on this land sometime last year, probably January. We did it when the weather was cold. We put the mulch on top, and the potatoes aren't going to be ready or mature all the way up until August, so there's no concern with E. coli or fecal coliform or other issues. So I'm just going to dig around here and just kind of show you what we have at this point. So you can see the mulch applied here on the surface, dry on top. So if I were to get weed seeds that would fall on the top here, they may germinate this time of year, but in the summertime when it's hot, they won't stand a chance. So we won't need to irrigate these potatoes at all right throughout the growing season. We typically don't water potatoes. We never water potatoes, even under the most dry conditions. We find that with no-till, potatoes work very well, and we don't have any challenges. So let me see if I can actually find a potato that's up here. So I actually was successful now in finding a potato that has popped out of the ground right here, and it's right next to a weed, and I think this is some grain that got mixed in with the compost. We go through on a weekly basis and we eliminate weeds. Perennial weeds are dug out with a spade, and annual weeds are removed. All the weeds are removed. We don't leave that laying there. I know that this might look like it's gonna die. If it rains tomorrow, that thing's right back. And so we are very particular. I see a little bit of clover coming in here, some more weeds. I need to get rid of those. Let's take a look at how this potato is doing. Okay, so this, I'm right here in the native soil. By the way, if I were to even do this with the native soil, this is going to be a patch of weeds in no time. And so I'm very careful, even on big scale like this. I'm going to cover up this hole that I'm digging now very carefully. So these potatoes, you can see quite a substantial root system on there already, and they're going to come up really, really beautiful. The nice thing about potatoes is that if I didn't mulch that well the first time around, and say I have a patch of weeds, and we can take a look around, we'll see some of that here. We got some more weeds coming up. Say I didn't weed that mulch that well, and I got a lot of weeds coming through. As long as they're not perennial weeds, if they're annual weeds, I can just cover with more mulch. So these potatoes, I could just come along, cover it up, they don't care, they'll be back. And that's why I really do believe that potatoes makes a really great first crop. Is it labor intensive? We do we carve the furrow by hand, or we carve the furrow with a machine, but everything after that with a hilling is all done with a rake. So we might move some of this mulch over and cover that up, or we'll come over with a manure spreader, we'll cover it up. But the harvesting is also done by hand. And the beautiful thing about a no-till system, which I should have mentioned earlier, one huge advantage is we don't use spades and shovels to dig up our crops. These potatoes, even when the vine has died off completely, we'll grab that vine and we'll be able to just pull these potatoes out the ground. And we do that with our carrots. Beets obviously come out. Obviously we don't have to dig those, but parsnips, now after no-till for about 5, 6, 7 years in some areas, the parsnips are starting to be able to pull out by hand, and we're talking, sometimes a 12 to 16 inch parsnip. So there's another huge advantage on the harvesting end. And then the further advantage is when we wash, the carrots and potatoes are coming out clean. We don't wash potatoes at all, and the carrots are coming out very clean. They're covered with a bit of mulch, but they don't have that sticky clay. You're spraying and trying to spray them off with a garden hose, and it's almost an impossibility, and you're spraying forever. Ours, just with a light spray, they're clean, just like that. And so we're leaving a lot of the material in the field. Okay, and we're going to take a look at, this is 1 year, or just in its first year of no-till. We'll take a look at some areas on the farm where we've been doing no-till for a much longer period of time. So we were just on the far side of the farm where we talked about transitioning from an original field into new no-till area, and I wanted to show you what it will look like after a number of years. So this area here, if my memory serves me correct, has been about 6 years in no-till, and that coarse material that you've seen on the other area there has now broken down. And so our application at this point is much more, you know, initially the first number of years we had a quite heavy application of mulch and compost. Now we're only concerned with feeding. So trying to make adjustments and amendments based on what we believe the soil needs. We're getting big into vermicomposting right now, worm composting, and so just a fine application on the beds in between as we transition from one to the other. So this was spinach, and you can see over here the spinach was overwintered, and I'm ready to move into the new crop, which is going to be carrots. So I went over with my mower yesterday, and I'm going to hit this a couple of times with the mower. Every time I'm going to go a little deeper. I'm not really trying to kill off the plant right now as much as I am just to break down some of the material, bulk material in this bed, and I'll demonstrate the flail mower in just a bit. So I'm just going to dig down here in this area, and what I should say is that this farm was originally very, very heavy clay, and what we've done through no-till, if I just bring this up, is create this really, really beautiful textured soil. I want to point out that at the bottom here we're seeing that, you know, original clay, but the worms have done much of the mixing for us of the layers. And if you take a look here just at the crumbly structure of the soil, no tiller has come in here. Look at the porosity. Right? As I break up these clumps, there's wormholes everywhere, and you can see the mixture of clay with the organic material, the humus, and the layers and layers of compost that we put on here over the years are now locked away in the soil. And any mulch that we apply, sometimes in the form of dead plant material like this, is now going to be consumed by the worms, who actually, worms have the ability to break this up and pull the food down into their little dens under the surface. And you can just see worm castings everywhere in here. You see plant roots. There's generations of plant roots in here. We don't ever remove plant roots unless it's in, you know, carrots, which were actually here last summer, and now we're in with spinach. The really, really cool thing is that even if I were to till at this point in this area, I probably would be bringing up very, very few weed seeds. So a lot of the weed seeds get consumed by the microorganisms in the soil, and I believe are eaten by other larger insects. So, you know, see the slime coming off the worm here, they form glues that hold soil particles together, small, minute soil particles with minerals. They hold that together, and it forms this really clumpy, crumbly material. So this worm just going nuts in there, right? Look at him, look at that beautiful hole. And that's one thing that has bothered me so much about tillage when we originally started, is if you're doing something that is going to kill these beneficial organisms in the soil, how can that be a good thing, right? What are we doing wrong? And that has been a huge concern for me throughout. And also the organisms that are designed to do their work down below at 2 inches or 4 inches, we're bringing them up to the surface, we're exposing them, and the ones that are on the surface, the beetles, the microarthropods, the arachnids, now we're bringing them down below. There's just so much wrong about that just doesn't, is not consistent with a holistic way of food producing. If you're killing the very organisms, the very workers in the soil, there's just, you know, you treat your workers well on the farm because you want them to perform well. Why then would we harm these workers, right? So let's take care of them, and that's why I believe that no-till is really the answer. Look at this beautiful crumbly stuff here. So I'm going to pass over at this point with my flail mower, and I'm immediately ready at that point in time to go in with a new crop. Sometimes I find there is a bit of challenge just getting rid of some of this. The new flail mower can't really get deep enough. But if I was doing this, you know, on a small scale, I'd have no problem just removing these plants and planting directly into this surface here. And maybe some of this debris is in the way. Okay, we'll take it off. We'll put it on the compost pile, and we'll go from there.
I can see that there's been some questions in the chat, and Dan, thank you so much for going through and just sort of answering as they come up. Maybe I could just open it up, and if anyone wants to, you can use the reactions to raise your hand or throw some sort of emoji up, and we could have people jump in and ask questions, or we could keep going through the chat. So maybe I'll just open it up right now. And does anyone have any questions that they'd like to unmute themselves and ask? Oh, yeah, Jesse, I can see you want to.
Hi, Dan. Nice to see you. I have so many questions because I haven't truly started from such scratch in such a methodical way as you're describing. But one big one is just the logistics of finding the mulch materials. And so I wondered if you could give us any hot tips about the Fraser Valley and mulch materials, or even compost, I guess.
Yeah, so we live in a fairly mulch-rich region of the world, I'm discovering, because I'm teaching a gardening course, and there's people in Alberta and people in Iowa and other parts of the world, and they're saying, well, we'd love to do what you're doing, but how do we get a hold of that mulch? And that's a huge issue. And even for people who here in the valley can get a hold of it, you might not have a place to store it. You might not have the wherewithal to distribute it over your land. And so these are really big issues, and I'm glad you asked. Probably the best place to get your mulch is wood chips. So what we're trying to focus on the farm here is a fungally dominant soil. That doesn't mean that we don't have bacteria existing. It just means that we have an abundance. You know, we may have more bacteria than a neighboring farm. It just means that we also have an abundance of fungi in the soil. And that's uncharacteristic of most vegetable farms. We believe it's essential in order for us to, you know, retain moisture and get good association with mycorrhizal fungi and the plants that we're trying to grow, especially if we're growing perennials. Your best source of mulch, I believe, is wood chips that are composted. And so if at all possible, we have a fairly large place for people to dump. We've contacted most of the wood chipping companies around, and just you know, getting them to dump on your property is probably going to be the biggest challenge. A case of beer goes a long ways. Just offer them something to get it on your property, and then if possible, let it sit for 1 to 2 years. Now, that doesn't obviously serve your immediate needs. So what are you going to do in the interim? Mushroom compost is usually quite readily available, although this year, for the first time, we have noticed it is not that available. And the reason for that is a lot more people are getting into gardening and market gardening, and it's in high demand. And the big composting companies out there are the first to get it because, you know, they have the wherewithal to pay for it. So that is another really good source. You could also look for hay or straw. And if there are hay companies out there that are selling organic hay and straw, or alfalfa even. Some of this stuff is costly, and so that's obviously a deterrent. Round bills sometimes that are going bad on farmers' properties is another possible source. Horse manure, has a lot of people, especially in the Langley region, who are doing horses. And if you have friends in the equestrian circle, then try to, you know, get a hold of horse manure. There again, you know, you're going to have challenges with high antibiotic use on these farms. So there are available sources. They're not always going to be organic, and that's possibly going to be your big challenge. Now, you can mulch with virtually anything, any dead plant material. So we've brought in organic chicken manure, and we've let it sit for about a year, and then we'll apply that at 2 to 3 inches. If you have a weed-free surface to begin with, no perennial weeds, and you've killed most of the weed seed bank in the soil through repeated tillage, which is very, very hard on soil, okay? But I see it as one of the best ways to eliminate weed seed, the weed seed bank in the soil. If you're beginning with a very, very clean surface, say you've worked hard all summer and you've been tilling and tilling and tilling, By the time you're into fall and your land is level and you apply 2 to 3 inches of well composted chicken manure, mushroom compost, horse manure, you should be good to go by the next spring for your first seeding of carrots or beets or whatever, spinach, arugula, anything like that, okay? The challenge we have with wood chips is it's fairly coarse, and our mechanical seeder doesn't always love moving through there. So if you're using an earthway or a jang, it's going to present lots of challenges. So, you know, we do use it on our potato crops. We use it in tomatoes, you know, some of the bigger things that we're transplanting, lettuce, for example, those things. If you're direct seeding, you probably want to stay a little bit away from the wood chips unless you're well composted and they're in smaller bits. So I hope that answers your question. So I see somebody, you know, immediately, hay bales, yeah, seeds are a huge issue in some of the hay and the straw that's available. That's another challenge. So compost it, right? So if you do a 50-50 compost heap with greens and browns, so nitrogen rich and carbon rich materials, you go 50-50 and you turn it frequently. If your compost is getting up to 140 Fahrenheit, which is kind of where you want it, you should be able to apply that, you know, after 3-4 months, you know, and that obviously depends whether there's animal manures in this as well. Do you have to be, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think also, Carly, you have your hand up, so maybe we could, we might only get one more question in, and I see there's lots in the chat, but maybe we could, during the next sort of section of video, Dan, if you feel like you can tackle it, I think answering the chat would also be great. But maybe, Carly, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to ask, as far as like turning beds over to no-till, if you're farming in already in a tillage-based system and don't have a season to do basically the process you just described, do you have recommendations? Yeah, I guess I'm curious how you could best transition without having a whole year to let a field sit, or even also kind of what the timeline you would suggest for trying to transition, like what I should be thinking this year if we have crops in all our fields in order to then next year switch it over.
I think I mentioned that earlier in the video, is that do it slowly. Like, we tried to do everything at once. I recommend you do it slowly. Keep your original system going, maybe on one side. If you want to transition like immediately, you just don't have the space available to, you know, do what I'm doing, and that's till repeatedly, and you want to get going. Eliminate the perennial weeds for sure. So those have to be dug out, and hopefully you've already done a lot of that work. And then try to get rid of as many of the annual weed seeds as possible on the surface. And then, you know, you could lay down cardboard. So that's a pretty common technique for smaller market gardens. You could lay down cardboard, or you could use the silage tarps that somebody was referencing a little earlier. And you could do a, you know, 1 month, 2 month kill, maybe in the heat of summer, or even going over winter. I see that as a possibility, right? So, you know, sometime in the month of November, maybe your crops are out, cover with the silage tarp, and then maybe February, layer 2 to 3 inches of compost on top. And you don't need a lot. That's a thing, like a lot of people think that, you know, you have to be like this deep tillage thing. I used to think that. I don't anymore. Remember that some mulch is going to eliminate most of the weeds, or a lot of the weeds, if they're annual weeds. And you don't need a whole lot to stifle the weeds. And then just maintain through cultivation, whether that be a wheel hoe or just a stirrup hoe, whatever you're using, maintain a weed-free surface, and then just layer on top again after a crop comes out. But whatever you're doing, once you move to no-till, and even if you don't move to no-till, you really don't want to be farming with weeds. You just don't want to be there. And that should be your main focus. You know, I'll bet you anything, Carly, and I'll just say this because I know we need to rush on, is that like looking at my own experience, if I would have stopped farming for one whole year and said, all I'm going to do in this 1 year is eliminate weeds on the farm. That is my only focus. That's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to be making money. I realize up front I'm not going to make money. And then start farming the next year in a weed-free mulched system, I would be way farther ahead than trying to make things work throughout that 1 year, and you know, all the weeding we have to do and all the hard work. Yeah. This flail mower, it has these claws that are attached to a main drum, very, very heavy drum that can gain a lot of momentum. So it turns at really, really high RPM, and these claws, they basically just bite away at the plants. And so we could actually lower it, which we've done with our old flail mower, so that it cuts into the top 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 inch of the soil. I want to have as minimal soil disturbance as possible, so we haven't lowered it, and I'm just trying to work with the system that we have right now. And then behind it, it has a roller, which kind of just packs everything down. But if you, I don't know if you can see inside here at these teeth here, you able to see that? Yeah. Right, so a really, really heavy claw. Real high RPM. If I didn't have one of these and I had a really small farm, even 1 acre farm, and I wanted to transition from one bed into the other, and I was dealing with something like spinach or salad mix, the good old lawnmower will do the trick, right? Mostly you're trying to get rid of a lot of that extra crop debris, right? So you don't have to haul it all out with a wheelbarrow. You do a kill, and you might mow it, say 3-4 times as you're transitioning into a new bed. And then a simple wheel hoe passing over the bed afterwards, just to chop the veg off right at the root. It's really all you need to do. And I like to leave the material in the bed, right, as a mulch, right? Following the rule of no-till gardeners is cover the ground with living or dead plant material. So I'm going to take this thing down. I'm going to go, you know, maybe 50 feet down here. I'm going to flail this bed of spinach, and the reason I'm doing that at this time of year is because we're onto the early spinach that this is overwintered, the new stuff that was planted 6 weeks ago, sometime in the month of March, and we're ready to harvest that. So this is going to go, and then we're going to get ready to plant our next crop, which might be lettuce, or it might be carrots or something like that. Mower was able to go a little lower, and I still have to contend with this plant here. It's obviously going to regrow, but I think if it does regrow at this point in time, I could just flail it once more. I get more green material as a mulch, and so I'm not too discouraged by that. And a simple pass of the wheel hoe here can easily deal with that. So. What I find with a flail mower is that when you work with more material, as you can see with the cauliflower here, it actually functions better, and because it seems like it has something to work with. And so we actually, you know, looks like there's very little material left here, right? Even though it's fairly substantial sized cauliflowers. And I just pass over once, and these stumps, the skeletons from the plant with the root system is still down below. You just take a look at the size of these roots, right? And this is all staying behind in the soil. So that's just one cauliflower plant. And because the plant is now dead, all these roots will decay and they'll become plant food for microorganisms, and they'll leave beautiful passageways in the soil for organisms to move through the soil, and also the water holding capacity is much higher. In this case over here, I had originally two rows, and these stumps are still left. So if I were to seed in here, you know, I think I would let it disintegrate for a few days, but if I really wanted to get seed in here today, I wouldn't hesitate really to, you know, maybe I was going to do 3 or 4 rows in here with the Jang seeder. You know, here's a row of carrots, here's a row of carrots, and here's a row of carrots. And they get seeded directly into this material, and I know for sure we're going to have really great results. And this mulch just will decompose and provide a really nice habitat for microorganisms. And one thing that I'm really looking out for on the farm recently, more so than ever, is the presence of beetles and spiders, so arachnids and anything in the beetle family, because I know that there are predatory beetles that like to eat cabbage maggot. And one thing that I notice about beetles is that they need habitat to survive, and what they're looking for is larger pieces of material that they can actually hide underneath, right? So they're looking for escape from predators that might eat them, and they're also looking for cool, moist areas. This affords that, right? So this mulch, this coarse layer. So we happen to live in a really beautiful area here, as most people do in BC, or all people in BC, one of the most beautiful places in the world as far as I'm concerned. When I go up on this mountain over here, which is called Chilliwack Mountain, and I see how nature functions up on the mountain or in the forest, or, you know, on the riverside, and I mimic that here on the farm, I feel that we are going to find the greatest success. And one thing we know is that nobody's tilling in the forest, and the leaves are falling and branches are falling and animals are dying, and all this material is distributed on the surface, and nobody's working this down below. And so when we mimic that on the farm, we're going to be best served, and that's really what we're trying to do here. Is copy nature's pattern and apply it in our context. And so when the new crop gets seeded here, there's no tilling and working this debris underneath. The other thing that we're also mindful of is that the instant we till, we are exposing nitrogen to the atmosphere, and we know it's nitrogen, and carbon is very volatile, and it quickly will turn into atmospheric nitrogen and carbon dioxide and quickly escapes. And so we've lost the very thing that we're trying to capture in the soil, and that's the carbon through effective carbon sequestering methods, and very simple system like we have here. This was flailed a few days ago, right? So this material here, cauliflower as well, and you can see if I flip this over, and I know it's going to be really, really hard to see in here, but there are tons of beetles, and it looks like a little spider running around there. I see a little red mite. There's lots of life right underneath here, and guys are moving in to work to decompose this material. This is fungal growth over here, this white stuff. So we're really trying to promote that biodiversity right on the surface here. Keep the community of life in the soil happy and well fed, and then they will serve us in turn as well. So it's really through the soil food web, I wish I had a better understanding of the soil food web myself, so that we could understand how plants eat, but my rudimentary understanding is that when small microorganisms, particularly bacteria and fungi, are consumed by larger organisms that are higher up on the food chain, such as nematodes and paramecium and amoeba, when they're consumed, they excrete plant-accessible nutrients. So those nutrients that are locked away in the bodies of the fungi and the bacteria, when they're consumed, are released and made available to the plants. And in the case of fungi, we know that fungi has multiple purposes in the soil. It is able to break up minerals that are contained, say, in rocky bits of the soil or mineral parts of the soil. They're able to break that up, absorb it. They're able to break down tough woody material, lock away those nutrients into their biomass, and then, well, it's locked away. How are we then going to release that to make it available to plants? Well, organisms higher up in the food chain will do that work for us, such as earthworms, we know, are very key in the consumption of fungi and bacteria, and then they release it. And where are they releasing it? Well, they're releasing it in the vicinity of the plant root zone. And why are they hanging around by the plant root zone? Because the plant is actively producing carbon sugars, proteins and carbohydrates, which it's releasing around the plant root zone, and that's where the feeding frenzy happens. And the plant obviously has an ulterior motive here. A lot of this research it's not, well, it's fairly recent. Elaine Ingham at the Rodale Institute, I believe I have the name right there. Elaine Ingham is largely responsible and is a pioneer in this movement, looking at how nutrients cycle through the soil with the microorganisms, and that's really what we're trying to promote, is a diverse community of life, all the way down from the microscopic to the macroscopic. And that's why when I see evidence of moles on the farm and I see evidence of voles, I know they're everyone's enemy. Unfortunately, we need to see them as a good thing. Of course, when their population gets out of balance, then they become a problem. And so that's where we need to see the owls and the hawks. And I'm always really, really paying attention to see who's visiting my farm as opposed to the neighboring farm who's farming conventional. And one telltale sign for me that we might be doing something right here is that the swallows are always flying over my property, and they seem to be missing his property entirely. So we have a lot of swallow nests here, but they're finding home here because there's food here. And what are they eating? Well, I really hope they're eating the cabbage maggot fly, right? Which is a huge problem. The cabbage butterfly is another big problem that we face. So these guys, I need them on the farm, and that's what I mean by feeding the entire community of life in the soil food web and above ground.
Questions in the chat as well, Dan. I know you've been answering a lot of them. If there was any that you want to expand on.
There is, yeah. I think, not everybody's going to be able to, your size of farm, you might not need a flail because it's an expensive piece of equipment, or it's an affordability issue, and I get that. If you didn't have a flail, don't feel like you have to do in-place composting, which is what we're doing. We're flailing, we're leaving the crop residue right there. It's very little work, and we can usually plant directly into that crop within a couple of days. If you didn't have that and you were dealing with, say, those cauliflower stems, which actually can be really tough and woody, you would just chop them off at the bottom with the pruners and throw them onto your compost heap. And if you could chop them up a little more, that would be helpful, and compost them with all your other materials. Don't pull at the roots, leave them right there, leave them intact, chop them up as low as possible. On a lot of the plants we struggle with are the ones that have their growing point very close to the surface. You've seen it with the spinach. I wasn't able to remove the spinach entirely. We have the same problem with a lot of the other greens. They grow really low from the surface. When you mow them down, they just regrow. In those instances, what I've found effective, if you have time, is to let them grow up really, really big and create a green manure. So I might do like an initial mowing. Say my Mizuna or salad mix has been harvested. I'm going to mow it as soon as possible after harvest, because there's probably some weeds that have been growing in there. And if I can mow it down, well, that's really a good thing. And then what I'll do is I'll let it regrow, and it might grow up to the 4 to 6 inch height. Maybe in the case of arugula, it might grow up to 8 inches or a foot, and then I'll mow it again. And eventually, after 3-4 mowings, the crop just tires out, especially after it begins to seed. The same thing is true for when you want to get rid of, say, a crop of rye or barley that you've overwintered. A really great strategy on how to do that is to wait till it's starting to form a seed head, and then at that point in time, hit it. You don't want to hit it too late, because the seed might become viable when it dries on the ground. If it's already formed a seed head, hit it on time. You'll know when that time is. The seed is still soft in the head, and mow it down, and then it's going to try to regrow. Mow it again, and eventually you're gonna win that battle. Now you've got a nice crop on the ground, and you can grow right into that. So some farmers are now doing, or a lot of farmers are using a crimping method, where they'll mow down or flatten an existing crop and then grow right into that. That's really fascinating. One thing I will say about anybody doing cover crops is cover crops, in my opinion, in a no-till farming system, should only be grown when you've completely eliminated all the weeds. Otherwise, you shouldn't be doing cover crop. It's really difficult to maintain a weed-free area when you have wheat that's growing up. Maybe it's growing up, a foot, 2 feet, 3 feet tall. You think that it's going to block out the weeds. Well, chickweed and the like are going to be able to grow underneath that surface and reproduce, and then now you're just introducing new seeds to your garden, and you don't want to do that. So maintain a weed-free overwinter or a cover crop at all times. Questions?
Yeah, feel free if anyone wants to unmute themselves. Yeah, feel free to do so and ask a question. I did have a few. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Did I hear? Sorry, it's quite quiet, but did I hear someone say they had a question?
Sorry, yeah, I was just messaging in the chat there, but thank you for answering that, Dan. That was exactly what I was looking for. I was just trying to get a feeling for how.
Sorry, you cut away there.
I think that my connection's getting bad, but thank you at the end of the day. Thank you for answering the question. I think you got pretty much what I was looking for, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Laura, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, just to speak to the cover crops and weeds, Dan. Sometimes cover crops are like talked about to help suppress weeds. So are you just totally not in that camp?
Well, if you've eliminated all the weeds, then you don't need to suppress them anymore, right? I can see that where it could be useful if you have a lot of weed issue and you want to have less weeds and you want to find a way to suppress them, then a cover crop is the way to go. But from experience, cover crops over winter will, you're still going to be growing weeds in there. And so when we've done wheat or barley or rye cover crops, we've gone through with wheel hose, and we've been wheel hoeing them right through the duration of the crop, and then hand weed when we couldn't get the wheel hose in there anymore. Just in my experiences, even grasses will seed at the base of these cover crops.
For sure. My experience so far, and it's limited, but I've tried to do a combination of crops. So like having various clovers under oats and such, so that they're kind of tackling different areas of the cover crop, but still a few creep through. And I'm hoping that once I mow those down, that over time they'll go away. But yeah, your opinion sounds super solid. Just get rid of them when you can. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. The last thing I'll say about cover crops is choose a cover crop that you can actually eat, especially if you're in the lower mainland here. There's lots of overwintering foods that you can grow. So for example, leeks, overwinter onions planted 37th week of the year. I have that date nailed down. So sometime, I believe it's September, that's very late, so you can do your seeding of onions. Overwinter cauliflower, broccoli, some of your storage cabbages. That hits the brassicas, fava beans, and more that are kind of passing my mind. Well, even carrots, keeping carrots in the ground over winter, provided you have good drainage, and red beets that you could mulch up with some coarser material if you're concerned that they're going to freeze. Just layer some wood chips around the base of the plant. So choose cover crops you can actually eat and sell, because then you can make money on it at the same time. I'm not against wheat and barley, but you usually, especially here in the lower mainland, you're not going to bring them to seed, although we've done that, and then harvest and sell. That is possible. But typically, when I think of cover crop, I'm thinking of something that's edible. Here's another one, the winter radishes. So if you're growing some of the round Asian radishes or a daikon radish, just an awesome cover crop. The daikon radish, I just love them because they're so easy to get rid of the next year. And if you get a really cold winter, they'll freeze and they'll just disintegrate. So those are just some thoughts I have about cover crops. The question that somebody posed was, if we have really clay soil, should we add sand to the soil to make the amendment and try to create the loamy soil? We all know about the soil triangle, and we're trying to reach a spot right in the middle or a little bit below the middle that indicates that we have an equal amount of sand, silt, and clay of the right proportions, not equal amount, but in the right proportions. And what Elaine Ingham has shown is that when we have an abundance of organic matter in the soil and we have really good soil life, so the community of life in the soil is flourishing, we're actually able to change clay soil into soil that functions. I didn't say soil that has the properties of, I said soil that functions like loamy soil. Okay, so with a lot of clay in the soil, originally here on the farm, through the addition of lots of organic matter and no-till practices, we now have a soil that functions as a loamy soil without the addition of those other mineral particles. So no, I wouldn't add sand or other mineral bits to your soil in order to get that to happen. Yeah. Okay. Well, the question is, what type of wood material could we use as a mulch in our garden or our market garden? And the answer is, we use any type. Whatever's given to us, we use. And that includes kind of the forbidden ones of cedar and walnut. But we are now actively working to compost these mulches. Originally, when we just applied them to the field, I do think that there was some adverse effect in doing so. And so I would stay away from walnut and cedar, try to get a healthy mix of the other ones. But if they're well composted, I'm not that concerned. As long as there's, you don't want to use straight walnut or straight cedar. I should mention that these are always mixed in proportion to the other types of wood that are available in our area, which is lots of cottonwood, lots of maple, lots of Douglas fir, and then, yeah, there is unfortunately a lot of cedar around as well. We usually sometimes separate some of that just so we don't have like all cedar in one particular area. So well composted wood chips make great mulch.
This area here where we had spinach formerly, this was overwintered, planted sometime last year, September. Now we have our next crop of spinach. This one's going to go, and I flailed here already a few days ago, and now I'm going to be doing some planting of some little lettuces. I have a dibbler here, which we constructed ourselves, all of stuff that was laying around the farm, and I encourage you to do the same, at least in phase one. Build it, see how it works, and then if you're happy with it, maybe get someone to take it to the next level. So we're going to bring this into the metal shop, and they're going to actually build us something that's not going to fall apart, but it's served us well for probably 5-6 years now. And but it's falling apart. Screws are falling out and rusting, and so I'm going to jump on and pull this ahead a little bit. So this unit, this dibbler is more of a bed marker as opposed to like an actual hole punch, although, you know, it gives us a pretty nice hole. So I'm going to grab that lettuce and we'll just plant some in here. It's popping holes on a 6-inch spacing, but my lettuce here is going to be planted at a 12-inch spacing, so I'm going to plant every other hole. I would have preferred to actually go through and weed first. You can see there's some small weeds in here. They definitely should have been removed prior to planting, but really this is the extent of the weeding that we do on the farm here. This is about as bad as it gets in developed areas. We're very, very meticulous. Nothing gets to reproduce if you're a weed. And if you did want to grow weeds on your farm, you decide where they go, when they get planted, and when they get harvested. Don't let the weed take control of your life. This is a variety called Cuervo. It's a butter lettuce that we find performs really, really well. And so I'm just going to go in like this. We do all our planting by hand, and we're doing a fairly big farm. And I really think that if you need a planter, I don't know, how much time is it really saving you at the end of the day, and the cost and everything else associated with that. We can, you know, I'm not planting at my full speed right now. There's one hole that got missed by the dibbler, but yeah, so let's see here, I'm on the right grid.
So even though, like, because right now we don't see any material chopped, but you would do this literally like into the spinach that you just chopped up. Yeah, like regardless of how much material there is. And with the dibbler, if you were to go across the spinach you just chopped up, could you still see the holes like where you're supposed to plant? Like, is it pretty obvious? Okay.
Yeah. The only thing with planting directly into that spinach I just chopped up was we didn't actually deal with the root, or the like, it's going to regrow, so that growing part of the plant is still there. So I would have liked to chop that off first, go a little lower the flail or the wheel hoe and then just remove that. But I would be quite content to go over with the dibbler right now, and if we got the plant out of there and plant directly into that material. And we frequently do that. We just go in from one concern that people have with no-till and using a really coarse woody material that you strew over the surface and plant into is, can your machine handle it? Can the Jang cedar handle it? Or whatever, maybe the earthway or whatever you're using. And we find that there are definitely some challenges. So in this case here, 9 beds or 9 rows of radishes in a single bed, we find that our Jang cedar had some challenges. As you can see with these gaps over here, You can see another gap over here where we had to lift up the machine and remove some of the sticks. So not really great conditions for seeding into. I prefer to you know, when we were looking at the spinach over there that didn't have that coarse application of mulch, well, this did. You know, sometime this winter we came over and we put probably 3 inches on top, maybe 2 inches. Kind of broke down to maybe 1 inch on top. And now, you know, if I dig around here, you can see if I remove some of the mulch on top and pull some of these radishes out, if I remove some of this coarse material at the surface, you know, right at this stage, now I'm right back to where I was in the previous area, and I can pull this stuff up and you can see how nice and rich and soft the soil is. So the roots of the radishes are really growing deeper down into this material over here. The concern that a lot of people have with applying a lot of wood to the surface of the bed is that you tie up nitrogen. We haven't discovered that to be the case, and we're very liberal with high carbon application on our fields. And of course we are applying higher nitrogen products as well, such as composted chicken manure and cow manure, but we haven't noticed any negative effects with, you know, nitrogen being tied up, and we get some really quite pretty radishes this time of year, right? You can see, you know, they're not all going to make it to the shelf. I see a pretty bad clump over here with some disease, but by and large, I'm quite confident that what we have here is quality that we can bring to market.
So why in the winter with this bed did you decide to like lay an inch of mulch? Because do you do that with every bed in the winter, or is it just...
No, so yeah, I guess that's a really good question. Occasionally, or every so often, we just want to reinvigorate the bed with more mulch, and because we have so much mulch available here in this part of the valley, we're very liberal with it. So my thinking is, let us try to build up the bank in the land, so as much carbon material as possible. I don't know what the future is going to have in store, so maybe in a year or 2 or 5 years we're just not going to have this availability. So what I'm really trying to do is build up the carbon store in the field, and because we have so much mulch available in the form of mushroom compost, we've got some organic mushroom farms in the area, we have an abundance of wood chips in the area, we have organic chicken farms in the area, and when possible I bring in organic cow manure, and so we have this huge reserve of material, and it's very cost effective at this point in time. We have the space to store it and compost it, and so I do that, and I almost do it in a bit of a greedy manner. I feel sometimes, you know, I'm just hoarding all this material, but I'm putting it in the land, and we're really trying to build up our carbon. You know, I'm hoping there will come a day when I can dig down 2 feet by hand. In fact, let's see how deep I can actually dig right now without a shovel, right? How deep can we go? And don't forget that this material here, this land was a very, very, very heavy clay. Okay, in fact, you wouldn't be able to scratch the surface now. We have a little bit of sun, the surface of the soil would be rock hard, and it would have cracks all over it. And look at what has happened over time with just plants growing here with this dark, beautiful material, which is a mixture of clay and, you know, I'm not going to exaggerate here, but I think I'm probably 8-9 inches down, and now that the digging becomes more difficult and I'm starting to pull up more clay material. But I dream of the day, this is 8 years, I dream of the day when we can go down 2 feet. And you can see why we're able to pull our carrots directly out of the soil, right? So on the top, yes, very coarse mulch, down below, beautiful soil. And people who are in their first or second year of no-till, we weren't able to do this initially. And your results are not going to be what we're experiencing now today. And our results weren't spectacular. For sure not in the first year. It got better the second, and by the third year, we kind of felt we had arrived. Every year, the quality is higher, the productivity is higher, the yield is higher. Are there challenges? Initially, yes. Applying this bulk amount of material requires a lot of hard work and persistence. Staying on top of weeds, You know, we really didn't make money in our first 6 years. It was really our 7th year, you know, we did better, and COVID year was really when, last year, 2020, was when we had our first breakthrough year, and it feels so good. So 6-7 years, guys, that's really what it takes, I believe. And other farms that I communicate with, if you can hold on that long, it seems like, you know, things just do get better. But always keep building fertility as time goes on.
Is there any in the chat that you didn't get a chance to address that you would like to speak to? Oh,
I just seen something come up on pest, and I will say that, you know, some years I find myself bragging that there's so few pests on the farm and that we got it figured out, and this no-till thing is working so good. And then this year we're really struggling with the cabbage maggot, which in its adult stage is a fly, lays its eggs near the base of your brassicas, and seems to become has been a pretty big problem. And this is in an area that's been no-till for about 2.5-3 years, and I'm hoping that will disappear over time. So yeah, not everything is as rosy as maybe I'm making it out on the video. A little caveat there, you know, sometimes you're hit by these surprises, and you know, I will say that wireworm initially was a huge issue on the farm. We were transitioning from pasture into vegetables, and that is a classic, right? Wireworm is a big problem. That's completely eliminated. I haven't seen a wireworm in a number of years in any of the new areas. So yeah, there are, you know, we do have our issues still, and but generally, yeah, it's been really good. Of course, I have nothing to compare with, because it would be only fair for me to compare, say, with a neighboring farm who would be doing the same or growing the same types of crops in a tillage system. That's a fair comparison. It's not fair for me to compare to, you know, what somebody is doing on the other side of the valley, up against the mountain, or, you know, in a different climatic region. So, but as far as I can tell, things are working.
Yeah, thanks. There was a question that came in just asking if you do crop rotations with brassicas as well.
We don't. That could be part of the problem. We don't do any crop rotations with any crops. If it's convenient to plant a crop in the same area 2 years in a row, which it usually doesn't happen anyway, but we're not consciously saying, well, last year we planted garlic here, so this year we're not going to plant garlic here. We, you know, if it just happens to be convenient to plant garlic in the same spot, we'll do it. So we don't worry about any of that stuff. Maybe that's why we're having some pest issues, but from what I kind of have been, you know, researching, is that some plants, like potatoes especially, make an association with a specialized type of fungi, which, you know, the mycorrhizal fungi in the soil. And those potatoes, it takes time for this association to develop. So it stands to reason that if you plant potatoes in the same area next year, then these specialized assistants will be in place already. So, you know, that kind of makes a lot of sense to me. Of course, I haven't scientifically verified that, and I don't know if we can verify a lot of these things. But, you know, my thinking is, if you're growing tomatoes in one greenhouse 1 year and you end up with blight, let's not pretend that growing it in the next year, somehow that blight is not going to be, you know, attack your tomatoes. You're better off focusing on positive plant care. I think it's Elliot Coleman who says that we should be plant positive care as opposed to pest negative care. And so focus on how do we create healthy plants, healthy ecosystems for the organisms that work alongside plants, and to build strong immune systems in the plants that we're growing.
Mm-hmm. We also have a question that came up from Sarah. Hey Dan, any recommendations for someone starting this process from scratch that would be different from what you have already discussed? Our land has never been farmed and 30 plus years of untouched canary grass growth. We're also really struggling with drainage. If you have any recommendations or resources, that would be appreciated.
Oh yeah, if you're in the Fraser Valley and if you have, or in an area where you have a lot of rain, your first job will be to make sure your land is properly drained. Drainage issues are, if you have saturated land, that is a huge contributor to pest problems. I'm thinking of crane fly larvae, cabbage maggot, and other pests, wireworm, seem to, the problem is perpetuated when we have really soggy, nasty conditions. You're gonna create anaerobicity in your soil, so you have an anaerobic condition, and our vegetables that we're growing are, aerobic lovers. They like oxygen-rich soil, which is why tillage usually works so well, is because you're stirring it up and you're introducing lots of oxygen initially into the soil. And that's why we continue to practice that in many cases, in the world. But if you work towards getting good drainage and you introduce a no-till system, you're going to get that aerobic conditions in the soil. So to answer this question, Sarah, get that field drained first of all. So we use Big O on the farm, just like a weeping tile or drain tile that people commonly refer to this as. It's a plastic pipe with holes in it, and it's covered by a fabric material. You can just dig that in. We dig it down as low as possible, some cases 2 feet down. We drain it into the ditch, and you don't need to put drain rock around it. The water will find its way into this pipe, and it will drain into the ditch. So slope it slightly or keep it level into the ditch. Get things drained, number one. And then number two, I'm a little concerned about the canary grass growth. Another method that I haven't really talked about, I don't know of any other way to get rid of it. I know that a lot of conventional farmers would say, well, that's easy. It's called Roundup, right? You just bomb out of the field, you spray the Roundup and you're good to go. If you are an organic, if you're trying to do things organically, you've got a lot more work. You've got your work cut out for you. I've had people in the gardening courses that I'm teaching saying, no, we're just going to spray Roundup in our first year. And I'm like, okay, well, I'd rather have you not do that. I just don't think that's the environmental way to go. They're persistent in it and say, after this, we're not going to spray it anymore, honest. And so they spray Roundup in their garden. They kill all the weeds, the perennial weeds included, although not all the perennial weeds will die from it. And then after that, they're mulching and they're so-called spray-free, but not too sure.
Awesome, thanks, Dan. Alejandro, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you, Emily. Hello, congratulations. Amazing how you transformed that soil. One question, Dan. We have a lot of demand for mostly brassica produce. And so I don't know, we did poor crop rotation, and I don't know what your experience is to manage club root and things like that. And with your no-till, and do you grow a lot of brassicas? And
yeah, so of the 25 acres that we have probably 3 to 4 acres, especially as we go into the winter, we up our brassicas just because they're really good winter keepers, or they last late into the season and right up to Christmas and beyond. So we do grow a lot of brassicas. I do not know anything about clubroot. We've never had it on the farm.
Do you do crop rotation every year, or?
Not if we don't have to. I'll put them in the same area year after year. But you have to remember that if we planted brassicas in, say, July, say overwintering broccoli and cauliflower, we planted that in July. But the next year, when that comes out sometime in May, April, May, I'll probably go into celery or carrots or things like that. So no deliberate crop rotation, but I might just go back in with brassicas. if it just happens to be convenient to do that. But apart from that,
so,
yeah,
well,
even
it's like the brassicas are normally, sorry to go, trying to go deeper into the question.
No, it's good.
But it's like a clubroot is a typical product illness of brassicas in many parts of the world, and Oregon, and there's a lot of studies about that. And maybe it is introduced through manure, chicken manure. I don't know what your thoughts are, but
yeah.
And if you had that, what would you do?
Well, I'm not going to get in a first name.
Who you call?
Yeah. If okay, suppose that I had clubroot on the farm, which I hope I don't get. Maybe it's going to be here this year, but it's not been here yet. If I were to get any kind of pest or disease on the farm, our approach is a do nothing approach. Okay, so by that I mean we might just, yeah, so we just keep planting just the way we always did. So I don't know about that particular ailment that afflicts cabbage plants, and it's probably one of the worst, obviously, because otherwise you wouldn't be so adamant in trying to push me for an answer there. But yeah, I can't speak to it. So we have cabbage maggot, and we have the cabbage butterfly, or the moth, or whatever, the white guy that flutters around. But we do nothing. No BTK. We get some aphids, very minimal aphid infestations. But yeah, I do believe that the answer, maybe the answer why we don't have clubroot is because we're doing no-till. I don't know. A lot of other farmers have visited my farm and probably carried it along in their boots or on their clothing. But it hasn't been an issue for us. Sorry, I can't answer your question more thoroughly.
Okay, that's okay. You're partially answering it.
Okay.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Dan, and thanks for all of your questions, everyone. We are going to just move on to the last section here of the video. It's about another 10 minutes, and then we can just end off with a series of questions. So.
I think one of our biggest challenges here on the farm has been dealing with the crazy amount of rain that we get in the wintertime. And it really has hampered our ability to do overwintering crops. What we've discovered now with good drainage, you can pretty much do anything you want in a zone 7 for overwintering when it comes to the good old hardy vegetables that we know and love. And they include like the winter radishes, the Chinese radishes, arugulas, the mustard greens at least until Christmas time, broccoli overwintered, cauliflower overwintered, your leeks no problem, obviously the garlic, spinach overwintered, no problem in this region. And for people who are finding challenges overwintering these crops, I don't think it's because it got too cold. I don't think it was because there was too much wind. I think it's because your drainage was not adequate enough. You really want to make sure that after a good rain, you're not going to have puddling water. My rule is 12 hours later, the land should be have no puddling water anymore. And so if you do have drainage issues, you can deal with that through no-till. It takes a lot longer. You really need to go with some subsurface drainage system, and we use a Big O product, which is a 4-inch pipe that we bury as deep as possible, 2 to 3 feet down, every 30 feet on the entire farm. And that, it's like a weeping tile, a drain tile, some people know it as. The water finds its way into the pipe, and it heads out and it goes out to the ditch. And in the summertime, what we do, so this time of year, we're in May, we haven't had a lot of rain recently, we'll plug that drain. We no longer want to lose this water on the land, we want to conserve it. We'll plug the drain where it enters into the ditch, and if we do get a good rain at this time of year, it'll be held and locked away in the soil, and it'll percolate upward through capillary action and water the crops. So that's really important to bear in mind. I think if I could say what the biggest single challenge we've had is inadequate drainage. Every irrigation bed, so over here I got a line of irrigation that runs down these beds, and the irrigation runs every 30 feet. is we put in perennial crops. So that means that 1/6 of the farm, every 6th bed, is an irrigation row, and will include some kind of a edible tree or edible perennial crop, maybe flowers. In this case, these are 3-year-old apple trees that we're training vigorously to produce as much fruit as possible, keep the stature of the tree really, really low through effective pruning techniques. And this tree last year in its 2nd year was producing about 40 to 50 apples, and it's just a small little tree like this. We don't want to block light, obviously, for the crops here. In the summertime, when the tree leaves out, there's going to be some shade, which is okay. In the wintertime, because it's deciduous, the leaves fall, and we don't have issues with blocking sunlight. We have some larger nut trees, as you can see. My concern that long term, when those trees grow up to 50, 60 feet, we're in their 6th or 7th year now, is that we're going to block a lot of light for the crops underneath. At that point in time, I guess I could make a decision either to thin them, or maybe because we have a lot of land available to us here, maybe we just let them grow and we just don't grow anything underneath, or maybe we'll put pigs or turkeys or use animals as a way to farm that understory. So those are obviously concerns when trees grow a little bigger. And we grow a lot of flowers on the farm, so our general rule right now is like 1 in 6 beds, but I want to get up to 25% of the farm covered with flowers. And the flowers we're obviously looking for need to serve a variety of purposes. Number one, they're perennial. That's a really important thing. Perennials are deeper rooting. They don't need to be replanted, and they cover the ground a lot better typically. The second thing is that they bring in pollinating insects. They provide a habitat for the hoverflies and the paper wasp and all the other beneficials, the lady beetles and other bugs at the understory. Number 3, they provide value for the market. So we're able to either do cut flowers or essential oils or dyes or something of that type. And number 4, maybe that should be number 1, it provides beauty on the farm. And that's one thing that I find is that if we're going to try to convince the world to move towards small-scale food production systems or market gardens, then we need to show them how beautiful it can be. And flowers can do that really, really well. So grow lots of flowers on your farm, but make sure it's profitable at the same time, and I think it can be. So when we deal with pest on the farm, we try to take what Elliot Coleman talks about is a plant positive approach rather than a pest negative approach. So rather than try to combat the pest and come out with our arsenal and warfare to try to get rid of the pest, we need to ask ourselves, the first question is, why are they present, and why do we have an imbalance here? And one thing we've noticed is that poor drainage is a contributing factor towards having root-bound disease. And also other insects that seem to thrive in these really, really moist conditions, like the crane fly larva, which has been a huge persistent pest when we had poor drainage. It seems like the crane fly likes to lay her eggs in very moist conditions in the fall, and when those eggs hatch the following spring, they're doing so in the puddling areas. And we can't figure out why the plant is not performing well. We think it's a nutrient imbalance. Well, it's just because it's stagnant soil. Fungal problems are much more persistent in really wet areas, and so if we can eliminate, we can do a good job of drainage, that'll probably eliminate the pest. So asking ourselves, why is the pest present in the first place, is probably the better way to go. And also, kind of what I've been learning in my casual reading is that fungi provides castle walls around plant roots to protect plants, and also to provide plants. And the reason it's protecting plants is because it obviously is in the best interest of the fungi for the plant to survive and thrive, because it's getting all the nutrients from the plant, okay, the carbon sugars. But in return, it's providing protection around the plant root zone. And that's why tillage, I find, is destructive. It's destroying the fungal network in the soil, and we're killing the very protectors that we want to keep happy. So if I can feed those fungi and have them thrive and survive, I think we're better off. In cases where we have had worse bad pest problems is, the question is, you know, do you remove the bed entirely? Do you know, start over from the beginning? I find that sometimes letting that pest population just bloom and flourish, although that may seem contradictory, brings in the immediate, brings in the predators almost immediately, so to take them out. And then when you do get rid of the crop, you have the predators present on the farm in abundance, and they're going to be able to take out some of the areas where there was less of a problem. Another way that we deal with pests is to grow short, fast maturing varieties of especially cauliflower and broccoli through the summer. We grow a variety called gypsy broccoli. It's like a 60-day broccoli, as opposed to some of the varieties are 80-90 days. Well, that's an extra 20-30 days for pests to move in. And also I find that with flea beetles, another problem on the mustards and the radishes and kale in the heat of the summer, the way we deal with flea beetle is with frequent watering throughout the heat of the day. And so we have a controller that we set for watering on the farm, and on hot days we'll water every hour for 3-4 minutes just to cool the area down, put some moisture on the leaf, and we find that our pest problems have gone way down. So we're able to grow our salad mix almost right through the summer, and I'm talking about the mustards right now, quite easily just by that moisture application. One big challenge that a lot of market gardeners face is dealing with borders and keeping edges clean. And I really recommend that you don't see edges as, you know, useless space. So grow something there, and if you're going to grow something there, then you're forced to keep it weed free. So get those weeds out. See some, I think it's plantain over here. That weed's got to come out. And we're also growing this bamboo here. The long-term plan is that we're going to produce stakes for staking up our tomatoes. That's the ambition here. I'm not sure how long this is going to take. They're in their 3rd year right now. So this whole area I'm hoping to have bamboo right up against the wall. And then the wall itself is producing flowers and garlic chives we're growing there. And then also, like, if you look at, say, these cherry trees here, which are in their probably 6th year, we're keeping them squat through careful pruning. But the understory, obviously there's value in growing food there as well. So underneath I have strawberries, and even if I'm not actively harvesting them, which in this case we would be, there's still obviously something covering the ground, and living plants covering the ground is always better than anything, you know. We have also the mulch here covering the ground, but if we can have plants there as well. So think about farming everything. Like, you paid for it all, you might as well farm it all. And this area in between here, I should be growing something here.
Open it up. We have about 15 minutes, maybe a little less than that actually, for questions. So yeah, if anyone has a question, feel free to unmute yourself. Or Dan, if there's anything that came up in the chat that you would like to address. I can see that Laura just asked, can you repeat that tip about watering to avoid pest pressure? Was it daily or for a short period with drip irrigation? Is this to keep plants and soil strong and unstressed?
Yeah, so the watering that we do through the heat of the day, right now we're in the 30s during the day, and that wind is really tough on our crops, right? We have lots of transpiration happening. And so what we do with repeated watering throughout the heat of the day is to try to lower the temperature in the vicinity of the plant, which helps it grow and also allows it to take in the moisture that it might need. And these waterings, remember, because we're doing no-till, we got lots of moisture down below. There's an abundance of moisture in the ground. We have a lot of clay and a lot of organic material, so it's like a sponge. So we pick up that moisture, and what we're trying to do with the watering in the heat of the day is just keep the surface moist. And this also helps, especially if you have a lot of coarser material on the surface to break down the wood and the leaves and the other mulch that you might have there. Breaks it down a lot quicker, and it allows organisms to scurry about on this cool surface. You're going to see beetles actually moving about even though the temperature is quite warm, and so there's a lot more insect activity and definitely microbial activity on the surface as well. Those are just some of the reasons. So how often do we water right now? And I think for most areas, I'm probably watering. So we'll do kind of like a 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock watering in the morning. And then we'll have our next watering will be about 10, and then 12, and then 2, 4, 6, and 8 probably is the frequency of the watering right now. And then on cloudy days, we'll just change that watering. So everything's automated here. And if you aren't currently using a controller or an automated system, I highly recommend you move towards that. It's going to save you water and save you a lot of headache. And so you can get a simple 3 or 4 station rainbird timer, probably for $150, $250, somewhere in that range, and that's going to allow you to do a lot of your watering. And if you are working with a small market garden, then you want to, I recommend you look at using a mini sprinkler, so a Dan mini sprinkler that they named after me. No, they didn't, but a Dan mini sprinkler is a really, really great sprinkler, and they spray in about a 12 to 15 foot diameter. If you get the right size and the right nozzle, they use very little water, and it's like this nice fine rain that's going on the plants. Usually they're a little closer to the surface. Of course, if you have tall plants, that's going to be an issue because you want to water above your corn. Although corn, I would probably use drip irrigation for. So use a Dan mini sprinkler, or what we use on the farm because we're watering a larger area is what they call a meganet. And I can type that into the comments just so you get both of those. And so meganet. And when you do water with an irrigation timer, then you're going to water a lot smarter. So I don't have to walk out way out in the field to open a valve or close a valve, or you're going to forget to close it, or you're busy, you're caught on something else. Here it's just a matter of I just planted in section 15. I'm going to set the timer for 15 minutes 8 times a day, because I want to make sure those transplants don't dry out because it's extremely dry. So watering to me is really, really important. I see some people are using drip tape. You're going to save a lot of water. My issue with using drip tape is with a no-till system, especially when you just get started, your material is usually quite coarse, and your soil hasn't formed these beautiful aggregates at this point. And so what happens typically, the water, it's going to drip, drip, drip just in one spot, and it's going straight down. Whereas if you are using a till system, you're tilling, then the water is going to form a circular ring around the dripper, and that's kind of what you want. But if you are doing no-till, then the drip tape is not very effective unless you are doing transplants that are exactly the same distance as your drippers are in your drip tape, which could be 6 inches or 12 inches. And yeah, so that can be a problem using drip irrigation if you're doing something like carrots or parsnips or beets or something where you want to germinate, you have a germination crop in a no-till system. But it will work in a till system. If you are using drip tape, you don't need to water frequently during the day, because your only purpose is to, typically with drip irrigation, you're trying to do a deep water, and you want to water well below the surface. You're not a surface watering. So you can water with drip tape maybe 2-3 times a day. That would be sufficient, or even 1 time a day should be no problem, which we do in the greenhouses because we don't want to overhead water our tomatoes. And the tomatoes are small. Yes, we do overwater during the heat of the day, no problem. But as the tomatoes grow, you don't really want to get water on the fruit. And because that can cause splitting, and you're going to have blight issues, especially later in the season. Then we just do drip irrigation, and we'll just do it once a day. We'll just water, for 5-10 minutes, depending on your emitter size. And that will also depend on your soil type and other factors as well, the size of your tomatoes. Any more questions? Because that's a really important one that we talk about irrigation.
Yeah, and if you don't want to unmute yourself and ask, that's totally fine. And feel free to pop questions into the chat, and I can just read them aloud. We probably have time for a couple more. So
I can talk, just if people are mustering the courage to ask a question, I'll just talk briefly about hedgerows and their importance. I don't think I necessarily mentioned that as a refuge spot for, or a habitat for some of the organisms that because when I flail in between the hedgerows, if I have a flourishing beetle population, which I do right now in my lettuce, it is unbelievable. I'll chop out a lettuce, a romaine lettuce, or a butter lettuce. I'll lift it up, and there's like 6 or 7 beetles under every one that just goes scurrying about. What exactly they're eating, I'm not sure, but the presence of predatory insects is really, really key as a key indicator that soil is healthy. But now when I run over with my flail, I'm going to probably destroy a lot of these guys. Of course, their eggs are going to be in the soil and they'll hatch when the conditions are favorable. But the hedgerows also contain tons of beetles, and beetles move very fast. And so when I plant my new crop, now the beetles are already present within, walking distance of the new crop to take out any pests that we might have. And I'm pretty sure that the beetles are after the cabbage maggot. And I'm seeing them in and amongst the cabbage as well. Smaller black beetles, not the bigger ones with the big claws. These are smaller, rounder beetles. I need my handy companion guide to tell me exactly what they are. So that's one other advantage of the hedgerows. And I did talk about beauty on the farm as being really, really important. And I think that just when you have, from a design perspective, when you have a third dimension on your farm, so you got trees that create a sense of elevation or height, that just gives it more of a, I don't know, just stands out more, and it's more impressionable. And I really do want to hit on that. Just maybe if there's more questions, then we'll answer them. But just kind of in conclusion is that your farm should be beautiful. It should be picturesque for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, and that is that it's going to, if we're going to try to change things, if I'm going to try to change the way my neighboring farms, the conventional farmers are farming, the best way to do that is to model what really great farming looks like. I don't think we're there yet, but we're kind of heading in that direction. At least they're beautiful. And I really do think that it's important for us to have tidy farms, neat farms, farms that stand out, that you want to invite people to because they're really, really, really great.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love to visit all the beautiful small farms around the Fraser Valley myself. So we do have like a few minutes left. If there is any last questions, I think we could probably answer one more. Someone asked. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you can read the question. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, someone asked earlier what you do for pathways. I don't remember if you touched on that.
Pathways are on our farm are wood chipped, and then they're power harrowed once every 2 weeks or so, just to kind of fluff them up and make sure that no weeds are growing. And our ultimate goal, hopefully by the end of 2021, is that the entire farm, which is 37 acres big, minus the pasture, which is about, I don't know, 15 acres. So I think that we're farming about 25 acres of vegetables, but that entire farm, right from the border of the road to my neighbor's properties, is going to be 100% weed free. Not going to be any weeds in that whole area. And what's really important then is to remember that weeds along greenhouses, along your driveways or on the driveway, need to be eliminated. And we used to have kind of a lawn grass that we planted on our pathways. And it looked really beautiful. But what we discovered was that those, eventually you get like clover growing in there, and you get, you know, dandelions, and then you were forced to just mow it all the time to keep the dandelions down and the wheat and the grass from seeding. But what we were finding, that we'd walk through there, and then those weeds would be in our boots and on our shoes or on our bare feet, and then we'd track them right into the very beds that we're trying to keep weed free. So I do like the idea of a grassy pathway, but maybe what we should do first is make sure that we can eliminate all the weeds in that pathway through a no-till method that I maybe talked about earlier. And then at that point in time, say, now we got our borders established. What are we using for borders? Maybe landscape ties or something like that. And within that, we're going to seed grass, and we're going to keep it mowed, and it's only going to be grass that we're going to grow there. So I really am a big believer in making sure that all the borders, any square inch of your property that you're farming, needs to be weed free, or they're just gonna blow in, and then you just got further problems. So all our ditches need to be weed free, right down to the bottom of the ditch. I didn't say they had to be bare and mulched. You can grow beautiful things in a ditch, right? You can, maybe not the invasive species of blackberries that's currently growing, the Himalayan blackberry in our region, but maybe you want to grow the thornless blackberries in your ditch. Right? They'll probably do really good there. But again, it needs to be weed free. And I think we can get there. So keep it weed free first, then plant that beautiful plant, flower, whatever, tree, shrub that you're looking for.